Cass, good evening. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast tonight.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, man. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, definitely been looking forward to having you here. And where are you right now? It looks like you're in a hotel room somewhere. Are you
Yeah,
traveling?
I'm in Santa Monica, California right now. So get back to Phoenix, which is home tomorrow.
And what took you out that way?
Just work.
Gotcha. So
Yeah.
now, does work take you to the West Coast pretty often, or is this kind of a one-off thing, or
Well,
what's
no,
going
well,
on there?
I'm a commercial airline pilot, so it takes me
Ah.
all over the states, basically, in Mexico sometimes.
Okay, I am just now learning this about you, but I mean, of
Yeah.
course, that career field makes sense because you are a retired Air Force fighter pilot, and I think there is like I don't want to say like a lot. Maybe you could help me shine some light on some numbers here, but I'm sure there's a fair amount of former military pilots that probably do go into that line of work. It's a pretty good transition, I would say.
Yeah, it's a very easy transition for the most part. Especially, if you've spent a lot of time in the military, and even if you didn't, guys that spend 10 years in the military, a lot of times will just, be done with their service and decide that it's time to move on to other things. And within that time frame, you build a lot of hours. And you're well trained. And so we're actually pretty sought after, for the most part by the commercial airline industry. Um, it varies probably on, the different airlines, kind of maybe what the split is, but my guess is probably 35-40% of your guys on average are probably retired military pilots or previous military pilots of some sort.
Gotcha. Now, how was that transition from like a technical perspective? Because of course, like being a fighter pilot, your aircraft is a lot smaller than a commercial jet, and I would
Yeah.
imagine that the controls are they're similar in many ways, but there's probably a lot of differences there too, I'd imagine. So, how was it going from a smaller, faster aircraft to a much larger aircraft in that way?
So the flying itself is, I mean, flying's flying, right? Like aerodynamics don't change. Speeds, performance change, but the aerodynamics of airplanes don't change. So, you pull back, trees get smaller, you push forward, trees get bigger. All the same kind of rules apply. It takes you a little bit of while to get a feel for, at least for me, to get a feel for just a bigger jet. In the F-16, which I flew in the Air Force, one motor to something that's centerline thrust to two motors, which isn't really that big of a deal, honestly. The biggest thing was just the difference in avionics. So, like, I didn't have an autopilot in the F-16. I didn't have like all the different things that they have on the commercial side of the house for, flying arrivals and standard instrument departures and things like that. So, it took me a couple months to kind of figure out all of that stuff and how they do it on the commercial side. But to be honest with you, dude, the hardest thing for me was being a single seat guy for 20 years was being in a crew aircraft, like, and having to verbalize like what I'm thinking and what I'm doing instead of just doing it. So that was probably the hardest part of it, for me. And I'm probably still not that good at it, but the transition itself was pretty easy. I mean, whatever aircraft you fly, you've got usually three hydraulic systems. You've got usually three generators, kind of electrical systems, and they're all pretty much the same. It kind of varies a little bit from jet to jet, but it's all pretty standard. So, the transition was pretty easy, honestly.
Now, does most of your commercial flights are they domestic here in the States, or do you
Yeah.
find yourself going overseas quite a bit?
No, no, I don't have, I didn't, some guys really enjoy the overseas and international stuff. I didn't have any desire to do that at all. I've been gone from family enough that, going, the guys that the way that I understand it, guys that fly international usually have like 7 to 10 day trips that they go on. Mine are 2 or 3. So
Okay.
I'm just gone for a night or two and then I'm back home, which that works for me. And I've been all over overseas and I've seen a lot of the world and I'm grateful that I had that opportunity. I don't, I don't, I don't need to go back to most of it. So you know how that goes. So yeah.
Yeah, because I actually just came back from Romania just a little over a week ago, and doing the flight from London Heathrow into Dallas, that was like 8.5 hours long. It
Yeah.
was a long flight. So I can only imagine what it must have been like for the pilots sitting in the cockpit for that long. and just flying. I mean, I'm sure maybe like autopilot was probably used for maybe a
Oh,
good
sure.
portion of that,
A lot
I
of
would
it. Yeah.
suppose. But still, that is like a long time to be on duty when you have so many souls on board that you're kind of responsible for, right? And so, and then also just dealing with the jet lag. I mean, like I dealt with jet lag quite a bit coming back from overseas, from Europe. But, of course, like pilots, like especially those that fly internationally, they got to go back and forth. So I imagine that jet lag just must be a very, very tough thing to combat.
I'm sure it is. Because unlike the military, they don't have flight docs to give you go pills and no go pills, so you're not getting ambient or low grade speed to either put you to sleep or keep you awake so you can reset your clock faster. But, um, I have some good friends that do that stuff, and they all have their own techniques for how they deal with it. A lot of them are just try to stay on their own body clock time, regardless of where they're at, and just kind of do things that way. But yeah, I just, the F-16 combat ops, the hours could be long. I think the longest combat sortie I ever flew in a Viper was a little over 10 hours.
Oh,
But on
wow.
average, they were like 4 to 8. And then in training, you're anywhere from like an hour to maybe two max, hour and 45 minutes. So shorter legs, domestic, maybe an hour or two in the air, and then I can go get a cup of coffee or use a restroom or something like that. That works for me.
All right. I gotta ask, when you're up in the air that long in a single seater, there is just how to use the facilities when nature calls. I
Yeah,
mean,
so there are no facilities. So what we had was piddle packs, right? So it's basically like it's how would I it's almost like a baby camel pack with a big mouth on the top of it. And then inside of it was either, sponges that had been shrunk down, or most of the time they'd have like that gel, not the gel, but the powder that they put in like baby diapers that absorbs
oh, like the
water.
rapid absorbing
Yeah,
powders.
and then it
Okay.
turns into like a gel. And so, yeah, what you do is when you have to go, you just always have piddle packs in your helmet bag. And so we would roll our helmet bags up, and there was a spot behind the seat that you could put your helmet bag. So we'd shove our helmet bags into there. And then if you had to go to the bathroom, you just find, a particularly slow phase of flight. And first things first, you always safe the seat, right? Because the ejection handles are right between your legs. You don't want to accidentally snag that on something. And then all of a sudden, you're in the shooting out of the jet with things hanging out. So safe the seat, unstrap, roll the seat up as high as it'll go so you can get a little forward leverage. Because the F-16, the seat on the Viper sat at a 30-degree decline to help counter the G's. And so you
Right.
kind of had to get up a little on your hips and kind of lean forward. And then you just get your stuff out and do your business and fold it up and throw it back in your helmet bag. That's how you do it.
Well, I appreciate the enlightenment here because I feel like I've always like wondered that, but I've never actually really like sought out like how that was done because, and of course, then again, I mean, I've never really quite fully found out just how long like flights like that actually would go, especially again for like, single engine aircraft like fighter jets. Like when I was in the Marine Corps, I worked in aviation. My squadron flew the V-22 Osprey, which
Okay.
is, obviously two pilots, in the seat,
Yeah.
big aircraft, and I'm sure there was probably, if you had to relieve yourself, there's probably more means to do so in a
Yeah.
larger aircraft like that. So, but I wasn't sure what it was like for you being the sole pilot in in a fighter
Yeah.
jet.
That the Viper was really, there wasn't a lot of room in that cockpit. But that said, it wasn't like really that uncomfortable either. I mean, you had enough room to do what you needed to do. You didn't have a lot of extra room for anything, but yeah, it was fun.
Well, so let's go back a little bit here. It's just how did you kind of sort of find your way into aviation? I mean, did you think that like maybe it was from a young age, maybe you saw like maybe some aircraft take off in the sky and that was maybe kind of cemented in your mind that you may want to fly those one day yourself? Or was it maybe like later in your Air Force career that you wanted to start flying? Kind of take us back and sort of fill us in on that.
Yeah, well, I grew up in just south of Seattle. So Boeing was like growing up always a big influence in everybody's life there at that time. And but what did it for me was when I was 5 years old, most of my mom and dad's family lived in Pasadena, California. So when I was five, we took a flight from Seattle and went down to LA to go visit family on, I think it was Christmas or something, over one of the holidays. And when I was on that plane, I was like, man, this is cool. I want to do this when I grow up. And so I kind of had it in my mind that that's what I wanted to do. So when I was 15 years old, I had the opportunity to start taking private pilot's lessons. And funny story, I actually soloed an airplane before I could legally drive a car by myself.
Nice.
Yeah, but so I started flying when I was 15. I got my private pilot's license when I was 17, and then decided that I wanted to serve and kind of pursue the tactical fighter community. And so my first year of college, I went to Embry-Riddle in Prescott, Arizona, and was in Air Force ROTC. My mom had some health issues. She has multiple sclerosis. And so when I got back from my first year of college, her and my dad were going through a divorce. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to go back down to Phoenix. So I got a job loading trucks from like 10 at night until 6 o'clock in the morning. Helped my mom pay bills for about a year and a half until the divorce got finalized, and went to community college. So for like a year and a half, I would go to work from 10 to 6, and then I go to school from 8 to 12. And I just lather, rinse, repeat that for a while. Did some other things, got involved in politics for a while in the state of Washington, and kind of had the start of a kind of a budding career in that. But when I was about 22, 23 years old, it just hit me, dude. I kind of had, I at that point in my life, I was like, man, I've got this kind of new career started. I'm doing really well. Maybe that just wasn't in the cards for me, right? But dude, I could not shake the what if. Like, well, what if you did what you had to do to try? Like, what if, right? I just couldn't shake it. And so I remember just going, I can live with no. I can live with going to the Air Force and them telling me, no, you're not qualified, or no, you're not good enough to do this, but I can't live with what if for the rest of my life. So I started my own business doing some political consulting. I went back to school full time at the University of Washington so I could get my degree before I got too old to bid for a pilot slot. And when I was getting close to wrapping up my degree, I went to the recruiter, and I happened to have really good timing because this is like the late 90s. And we had that big drawdown. The Air Force had a big drawdown in pilots after Gulf War. And so they were short pilots kind of into the standard military, right? They cut with an axe. They always draw down too much or plus up too much, and then they either have too little or too much. And so I kind of hit the bathtub where they were short pilots again. And so they were looking for people that were qualified. So I went to the recruiter and I said, hey, I want to fly. And he goes, yeah, so does everybody else. And I said, well, I'm not signing paperwork unless there's a pilot slot attached to it. And he goes, well, finish school, come back and talk to me. We'll have you take the Air Force officer qualification test and see how you do. So I finished up my degree, studied for the AFOQT, scored really well on that, and ended up going to officer training school in Montgomery, Alabama for 4 months. It was 4 months long back then. Painful in the summer in Montgomery. And then from there went to Shepherd Air Force Base for pilot training. So that's kind of how it all started.
Now, you said that you were worried about aging out of the pilot slot. Now, what was the cap at the time for pilots?
Back then it was 27.
Really?
And so, yeah, and I was like 23, getting close to 24, but I was still working full time, and I was doing like one class a semester. And so that's where I started my own business. I went back to school full time for 3 quarters to finish up my degree. And I got into the Air Force when I was 25.
Gotcha. Now, I want to go back to another thing really quick. You said that you started soloing aircraft at 15, and then you got your pilot's license at 17. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it would be in like reverse order, where you'd have to get your license first before you solo, or
no,
is that
you
not
have
the
to
case?
solo. Yes, so you do a part of your training program to go to your private pilot test is that you have to have so many solo hours. So you'll do solo hours where you just beat up the pattern, and you're just working on landings and pattern stuff and the pattern calls. And then you'll do solo cross countries where you'll actually like fly to someplace else and land, and then take back off and go back to where you came from and stuff like that. It's all part of just the training program. I don't know how they do it now, to be honest with you. I'm sure that I know people still solo before they take their private pilot's test, but you have to have so many hours solos for proficiency before you can take your test with a FAA examiner. So, yeah.
All right. Well, another thing I got to ask in that regard, because you're kind of giving me ideas right now about, man, maybe I should go get my pilot's license too, just for the hell of it. But
Yeah, it's fun.
what I'd like to know is how did a 15-year-old finance solo flights? Because I'm sure this was not, a cheap endeavor by any means.
No, well, it was cheaper back then for sure in the early 90s or late 80s, but no, I was fortunate. My mom helped foot the bill and then I had a job. So I was working, part-time while I was in high school, and every dollar I was making was going towards my private pilot's license. So that's how I afforded it.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
it took, and it was over the course of 2 years. So it took me a while. It's not like I was flying all the time. I couldn't take that. I think back then you had to be 17 before you could take the private pilot's test, which is why I did it at 17. And I think that you had to be 15 before you could solo, which I don't understand how that works, how you can solo an airplane before you can drive a car by yourself legally, but you can, or at least you could back then.
That is very, very interesting. Well, I suppose if you're in an airplane, I suppose if something happens while you're up there, probably the only person that will come as a result of a plane crash would just be yourself. I mean, there's probably
Yeah.
not a whole lot of other I'll say civilian casualties, for lack of better terms, involved if something goes awry with you crashing your plane or
Yeah,
something
that's
like that.
probably pretty
So.
true. Big sky theory is what we call it, right? There's not a lot to hit up there, so it's kind of hard to get yourself in trouble unless you do something stupid.
Yeah, well, I would imagine back then there was probably even less up in the
Yeah,
sky. It's
for
probably a
sure.
lot different right now. So I'm sure that if I were to try to go out for my private pilot's license someday, I'll probably have a lot more traffic up there
Yeah,
than
for sure.
before. So, all right. So going into the Air Force, ultimately getting accepted and going into training. Just what was it kind of like showing up to training and kind of going with this? Because you're talking about a very, very long pipeline to
Yeah.
in order to become a pilot, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of discipline. And I'm sure maybe you probably had maybe a fairly high attrition rate. I would imagine maybe a lot of people didn't make it all the way through.
Yeah, we
Maybe.
did. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Was there more?
Well, I was probably thinking because not only is it a very long, but there's maybe a lot of technical aspects that I'm sure maybe a lot of people didn't quite fully pick up along the way, just as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the when I went to Shepherd Air Force Base, it was the Air Force has several pilot training bases, and Shepherd is unique because it's Euro NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training, and so we have NATO partners that are there as both instructors and students. So, like in my class, half of my class was made up of Italians, Germans, and Norwegians,
Really?
and then the other half was U.S. And then I had Italian instructors, I had Danish instructors, Germans, Norwegians. It's all the NATO partners, right? So, and what was unique about Shepherd at the time was, so most of the time when you go to pilot training, I started out in the T-37. They use the T-6 now. You do your first 6 months in the T-6. And at the end of that, they rack and stack everybody. So based on performance, test scores, and, all of your academics, how you do on all your check rides. I mean, you're graded on everything on every sortie. They rack and stack the students, and then they'll track there from either to fighter bombers or to heavies. And if you go the heavy route, you go to the T1. And if you go to the fighter bomber track, you go to T-38s. Well, there was no heavy track at Shepherd. So if you didn't do well enough to make the cut for a fighter track, they were going to wash you out in the first 6 months. So it was a little more of a pressure cooker in that sense, but it was also in some ways a little more laid back because that European influence from the instructor cadre kind of bleeds through everything. So it's still formal, but I don't think it's as formal as like just going straight to a U.S. Air Force pilot training base was, if that makes sense. I mean, we still had formal release and things like that, 12-hour days for most of it. But, the Europeans just bring a little bit of a different flavor to it. So yeah, you show up. It's like anything else in the military. It's a pressure cooker. It's a lot of stress. It's a lot of extra time, personal time, studying, prepping, because you're not just flying, but there's a ton of academics that you have to do. ton of tests that you take, and you're being evaluated every day on everything from, you know, your uniform and how you're dressed and how you show up to how you're executing in the airplane. Um, and so it's a pressure cooker, and I think that that pressure is what gets to some guys more than others. We had one guy in my class who had like over 2,000 hours of civilian time when he showed up, and he washed out about 2 months into the program. You know, and I mean this guy has more flying experience than anybody else in the class. You know, combined, all the other guys in the class combined. But yeah, you know, it's just it's a different environment when you get into a fighter cockpit, or you know, it just in a training, even in the T-37, which was a jet engine, but it wasn't fast. Because you know, it's hot. You got all this shit on. You got a parachute on. You got a mask on. You got a guy next to you that's yelling at you the entire time to stop sucking and do better. And so it's just, you know, it's a lot of pressure. But it's also great training, and you get really good at what you do if you just kind of put in the effort and put in the work. So, so to answer your question, when I showed up there, you know, when you get there, you're just kind of like, dang, man, you know, am I even really capable of doing this? Like, do I really have the skill, the mental fortitude to do this? Because it's a lot, you know, and it's a fire hose at the beginning, because you've got to learn all this stuff about an airplane. Because it's you know, I know 6 months sounds like a long time, but we'd have, you know, a bunch of academics and maybe 6 or 8 sims, and then you're flying. You're out there doing the walk around. You're out there starting the motors, taxiing out, taking off. You're doing all of it, you know, and so it's a fire hose for sure at the beginning. But that's how I would describe that environment. And that's a year long, right? So you do 6 months I did 6 months in the T-37, 6 months in the T-38. Over that year, I had 10 check rides, so 5 in each aircraft. And the check rides were, you know, basic contact, like just basic flying, landing, stuff like that. Some acrobatic maneuvers, to instruments, to formation flying, low level navigation, and then like advanced formation flying. So you go through that, and then you graduate and you get wings, but you still suck and don't know anything about tactical aviation. And so after that, they put you through a course that's called Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals, which is also in a T-38. And that's just really like a 3-month course, and kind of their last chance to weed out maybe anybody that snuck through the cracks a little bit, because it's focused a little bit more on tactical employment. So you do kind of what I would call very lame basic fighter maneuvers, because the T-38 doesn't turn real well. You know, and some basic surface attack stuff. And then once you pass that, then you're off to whatever aircraft you got selected to fly. You're off to your RTU. So for me, getting selected to fly the F-16, I went to Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, Arizona, because that's where the basic course was. And then that was another 8 months, 6-8 months of just basically doing the same thing, but now in an F-16. So you start in, you know, it's basically like a contact phase. It's just takeoffs and landings and instruments and figuring out how to fly the jet. And then you go right into the air-to-air phase, which is basic fighter maneuvers, air combat maneuvers, which is kind of like 2v1, 2 blue guys against 1 bad guy, into target intercepts, which is starting to use the radar a little more, but in some more benign scenarios, to air combat training, which is like full up, let's fight air-to-air type stuff. And then you transition into the air-to-ground phase, which starts with basic surface attack, just dropping little 33-pound bombs with a smoke charge in it on a numbered range and shooting the gun, to doing more advanced surface attack tactics. And then when you get done with that, then you get assigned to your first unit and you go there. And then depending on where you go for your first assignment, most places you're going to spend about 2 to 3 months in a mission qualifications training program to kind of run you through their wickets and what the specific doc statements are for that squadron before you're actually blessed to go to combat as a wingman. So it's about a 2 to 2.5 year process, depending on what time frame you go to, before you're, no kidding, qualified to go to war.
Gotcha. Now, you said you were assigned the F-16. Did you have any say in that whatsoever?
Yeah. So how it works in pilot training, or at least how it worked when I was in, was coming up, we call it assignment night. So towards the end of the T-38 phase, you'll have an assignment night and they'll hand out a dream sheet to every student. And you'll put down, my number one choice is the F-16. My number two choice is the F-15E. My number three choice is the F-15C or the F-22 or whatever, right? So you rack and stack the aircraft that you want to fly. And then what'll happen is they'll get the drop for your class, and it can be anything. It's needs of the Air Force, right? So you get the drop for your class, and there may be, I had 32 guys. I think we started with 32 and finished with 26. So we'll get 26 aircraft, and it's, maybe six F-16s and two F-15Es and four A-10s. And, it'll be a mix of a whole bunch for the USAF guys. And then they go down the list and they go, number one wants an F-16. So there's one off the board. Number two wants the F-15C. There goes so that's how it works.
Gotcha.
So you're racked and stacked, and you don't know what your ranking is. You have an idea, but you don't know specifically. And so it depends on the drop and where you're ranked in the class.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, being part of like a multinational training pipeline like this, you mentioned that some of your instructors were Italian, Norwegian, and you also flew with like other like pilots in training from those countries as well. Now, do NATO countries, I don't know if you are privy to like their aircraft capabilities, do they fly similar aircraft to us or maybe even the same?
Yeah, similar. Like we've sold a lot of aircraft that we have to a lot of the NATO partners, but not necessarily the same, right? So like the Germans were going to Tornadoes or F4s back then, because those were, I think, their two primary frontline fighters. The Italians still had like the F-104, which is like 1960s stuff, right? Like the Starfighter. And so it just depends. Like, so, some countries have their own unique aircraft that they've gotten from, other European countries or that they've made in country. Some of them have, F-16s, like all the Norwegians were going to F-16s because that's all they had. So, yeah, it just depends. So their assignment night wasn't as fun for them because they already know what they were getting. Wasn't a surprise.
All right. So another thing I'm going to ask you is, what are your thoughts on the Top Gun franchise?
Oh, Top Gun. Top Gun's great, man. I mean, well, we might have talked about this when you were on our podcast, but well, let's just talk about Top Gun Maverick because that's what everybody's seen recently, right? So,
Right.
Dude, the cinematography in that was awesome. Like, I don't know if sitting in a theater you could get a better feel maybe for, without actually being in the jet, what it's actually like just being low, being fast, like pulling G's, I mean, all that stuff that they were doing down low level in the canyons, that's stuff that we train to on a regular basis in a tactical fighter squadron, right? And so, but it's still Hollywood, so, and my take for like Top Gun Maverick is what I always like to say is, so like Maverick's the hero, right? He's the guy that we're all supposed to emulate as men, right? He's kind of the Hollywood projection of what a man should be, but he's a complete loner. He has no respect for authority. He doesn't want to be held accountable for any of his actions. He's completely trapped in his past. He can't manage personal or professional relationships. And so anybody listening out there, guys, that's not how we're supposed to show up as men, right? And like guys like Hangman and stuff, like Hangman would never survive in a fighter squadron with that kind of ego and that kind of attitude. Even if he was as good as he was, dude, we crush that out of people because that's not what it's about, man. You're a team. You're not out there singleton raging around. You go out as a four ship. You employ as a four ship. You got to be on the same sheet of music. There's roles we play. There's contracts that we follow. There's certain ways we have to do things to be effective in our tactical execution. And if you're just going to go out there and play the ego game and be a raging, guy out there by himself, dude, that doesn't work for us. So he'd have gotten squashed really fast in a squadron.
And of course, that was definitely something that was really highlighted about Maverick's character in that film. And also like the first one too. I mean, he was obviously a very skilled pilot. He was very, very good. And so was like Hangman too. But of course, Hangman as a result had a really, really huge ego, and he wasn't very like likable amongst his fellow pilots. So it seems like, yeah, the whole team aspect, being able to function as part of a team, that's going to become above like all else versus like how well you can maneuver the aircraft, it seems.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you, I mean, and don't get me wrong, there's fighter pilots that have really big egos. Let's not make that mistake, right? But yeah, I think Bob was probably the best representation of what most guys are like in the fighter pilot community, because he's just kind of the quiet professional that just does his thing and does it really well. And, he doesn't need a lot of accolades. He doesn't need a lot of hoopla around him. He's just doing his thing, man. And he's really good at it, And so, um, I was going somewhere with that. What was I thinking about around Hangman? I don't remember. It'll come back to me.
Well, we mentioned that Hangman's got a bit of an ego, and
Yeah.
it kind of made it hard for him to work with others.
Yeah, totally. And it is a team effort, right? Because it's not just a team effort in execution, but like you want to build the guys around you to be as good as possible, because you're only going to be as good on as the weakest link in the squadron on execution day, right? So
Right.
it's your responsibility, as you kind of come up through the fighter squadron and through the roles from a four-ship flight lead to an instructor or whatever, to kind of to teach and to build those guys up and to make them better and to make them more effective in the cockpit. So, yeah. And my experience too, guys that did have big egos in fighter squadrons were usually the most insecure motherfuckers in the fighter squadron. So, it was usually an ego projection to try to hide, whatever false insecurity that they had about themselves, about how well they were actually doing, or maybe how good they actually were. So, yeah, it doesn't last very long. I was when I was a squadron commander, we had a new guy show up who had come over, and he was supposed to be, and he was good. Like, he was very young, but very good. He had upgraded really fast, kind of underneath the timeline that most guys do. Very capable fighter pilot, huge fucking ego. And I went up to the director of operations and I said, I want to fly BFM with him tomorrow. So we went up and did 2 basic fighter maneuvers, which is just kind of 1v1 dogfighting. And I just cleaned the floor with this kid. And it wasn't to be a dick, right? It was in the debrief to go, look, dude, I know you're good. You've still got a lot to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
You gotta show some humility.
Yeah, you're not there yet, right? So knock it off. Quit acting like you've got all the answers, and you don't need to listen to the instructors in the squadron, and you know better than everybody else, because you don't. You're not there yet. You can get there. You've got all the skills and tools to do it, but you need a little bit of humility. So here's your humble pie for today. So
I've heard similar stories from, some guys on ground side too. Like I know a couple of guys in like the special operations community, and they say that they'll get some people who show up for training pipelines who are just like jacked beyond belief. Looks like they're just hitting weights so heavily in the gym, and they go in there with this really big ego, think that they're just going to level
crush
the playing,
everything.
like, yeah, just crush everything and just level everyone, trample the weak, hurdle the dead, all that stuff, until they get like 100-pound pack on their back, and then they got to go ruck like, over 10 miles, and then they crumble because like, just working out in the gym. And this is not to knock like, people who prefer the gym. I like going to the gym just as well too, but you're lifting straight bars, you're laying on flat benches, you're squatting like, on a perfectly level surface. I mean, that's great and all, and you can definitely get some really great results that way, but it's an entirely different animal when you're going up a mountain. The ground is uneven, and the weather, it could be like the sun could be beating down your face, or the rain could be pounding down on you just as well too. So like, yeah, some of my friends who went through there, they saw like a lot of these guys that showed up with like, yeah, this big ego, like they're gonna crush everything, and they crumbled like as soon as the pack was thrown on their back. So and then when they had to do cardio.
Yeah.
Effectively.
You got to get into football shape, man. If you're going to play football, you got to get into football shape, right?
Right. Absolutely. So, because, a lot of times when I see people who are like special operators, I guess I'll say the best I can describe them is like they're just kind of just normal. Like, I mean, they're very like lean. They're not
They're
like
very wiry usually. Yeah.
yeah, it's just I think a lot of people when they think of like they think of like Arnold Schwarzenegger in
Yeah.
Commando or Sylvester Stallone as John Rambo. These guys were just cut, jacked, and
Yeah.
shredded. But more often than not, every time I see a lot of special forces guys, they're just like lean, kind of wiry.
Yep.
You would never like suspect like they do what they do when you just see them walking down the street.
Yep. That's very true.
All right. So you mentioned that you were going to become a pilot. This was around like the time of like, I believe you said the late 90s. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I want to ask you, and I've asked Roscoe this as well, and I think this is going to be a stable question for other service members who come on the podcast, and that is where were you on 9/11?
So I was actually in Korea. I was stationed at Kunsan Air Base in Korea for a remote assignment. That was my first assignment out of the B course. And I was flying. It was like same day, but evening. Is that right? Or was it the, I don't remember if it was the next day or not, but we were taking off for a night vision goggle sortie. And uh, we were about halfway to the airspace and we got recalled. So on guard, which is just a frequency that everybody monitors, we get a message that says, all 80th Fighter Wing aircraft return to base immediately. And we're like, you look outside and you can kind of see the question mark over everybody's canopy because we never get recalled unless there's like weather maybe rolling in and they want to get the jets on the ground before it shows up or something like that, right? And it was a pretty nice day for Korea. And so we're all kind of looking at each other like, what the fuck's going on, right? And so we go back to base, we land, I shut down the jet. Crew chief puts the ladder on the side and I look at my crew chief. I'm like, hey, dude, what's going on? He's like, oh, well, an aircraft hit the World Trade Center. I am thinking like everybody else, probably a shitty day in New York. It's September, a Cessna or somebody who isn't, capable of flying in the clouds, accidentally got in the clouds and crashed into the World Trade Center or something like that. So I get out of the jet, I go into maintenance debrief and they had a big screen TV in maintenance debrief. And I see the smoking hole. I see the clear blue day smoking hole in the building. And then I think it was the North Tower that got hit first, right? And
I
then,
believe so.
and then while I'm standing there, I see the airplane hit the South Tower. And I'm like, oh my God. And so I go into maintenance debrief, finish up real quick. And about 30 minutes later, our squadron commander has all of us in the squadron mass briefing room. And most people don't know this, but at that point in time in Korea, we were the closest to Afghanistan. And so they actually put us into crew rest. So, in every fighter squadron, you kind of have an A team and a B team. So the A team went into crew rest and then the B team started generating aircraft. Because what most people also don't know is when we fly day to day in training, we will fly aircraft that may have, minor maintenance issues. Maybe something doesn't work 100%. If it's not going to affect how we are doing or conducting our tactical sortie, then we'll fly with it until maintenance can get around to fixing it, right? Well, when we're going to go to combat ops, they take all the aircraft and they run them through what we call generation, where they clean up any open write-up on the jet. So it's as good as it's ever going to be to go. And so, yeah, we went into crew rest, man, and we didn't know. We sat for like 48 hours, kind of things were going back and forth. The problem at the time was our sister squadron in Korea, or at Kunsan, was going through a block conversion. So they were getting a different version of the F-16. And they weren't actually combat qualified yet.
Gotcha.
And we have an agreement with the Republic of Korea that we will maintain a certain number of assets on Peninsula at all times. So we never ended up going. But that's what I was doing on September 11th.
So was that kind of sort of the chatter that you were picking up after the attacks that Afghanistan is probably where a lot of troops were going to be going? Was that kind of sort of like almost pretty much known right away?
I wouldn't say it was 100% known, but like we all knew that it had come from Al Qaeda, and then there was all the reporting that, well, all of Al Qaeda's in Afghanistan. That's where Osama bin Laden is. And so we all kind of figured that was probably the direction that we were going to be heading eventually. But yeah, we ended up staying on Peninsula. And I don't remember
how long were you yourself remain in Korea following the attacks?
So I left Korea in January of the next year. So I was there for another 3-4 months before I came back stateside for my next assignment, which was at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina.
It's interesting with that event. Like anyone who was, I guess I'll say at a certain age at the time, remembers exactly where they were when that attack
Yeah.
happened and knows like the details kind of around that because something about just tragedy to that scale, it just kind of sticks with you. It's
Oh,
like it's
totally.
really kind of hard to forget. Like for me, I was a sophomore in high school, and I had walked into history class that morning, and like every classroom has like a wall mounted TV, but we would only like use it if like we were going to watch like a video pertaining to the lesson for the day or something like that. But as soon as I walked in, the TV was on, and which kind of really, drew my attention right away. And then immediately I saw that the first tower was on fire. And I don't think we really watched very much live coverage at that point. But then somewhere, of course, along the lines of the second tower was struck, and there was so much confusion amongst the staff. Is just like, should we start sending everyone home? And I think we all kind of just we remained for the rest of the day, but pretty much all lesson plans were thrown out the window at that point. And that single event was ultimately like the main catalyst that led me to join the military, because at the time I had some thoughts about joining the military. I was in my sophomore year, so graduation was just a couple years away. So I was kind of starting to think about what I would do afterwards. And I definitely had all the right grades and the accolades to get accepted into a university somewhere. I had no doubt about that. But really, that was it. It's just like, okay, I'm joining the military, and I ended up doing the delayed entry program for the Marine Corps my junior year because
Yeah.
I was ready, and of course, the very next day, recruiting stations around the country had lines going down blocks, and
Yeah.
it was amazing to see.
Yeah. And dude, that was so transformative for the military too, for like me being in at the time, because for a couple of reasons. One was like 9/11. I used to tell guys this, like, you have to take every training opportunity seriously. Like, we're not up here. This isn't a flying club. We're not up here to fuck around, man. We're up here to get better every day, because you never know when the balloon's going to go up. You never know when there's going to be some catalyst or some, crazy event like 9/11 where, dude, all of a sudden, man, we're spinning up jets and we're going like 48 hours later, we're downrange, we're moving. And so, I think it brought a tone of seriousness to like what we did day to day. But then, I mean, hell, man, we were in war for 20 years after that. I
Right.
mean, it was just, and that operations tempo that I lived under in my career, and like all the things that came with it, with Homeland Defense. I can't tell you how many times I sat in an alert shack in South Carolina for Homeland Defense. All these things that we'd never done before, all of a sudden, we're doing, because there's a demand and a need for it. So it affected, at least in the fighter community, affected us in a lot of ways, because now there was, you had to get guys alert qualified, and we had to spend time doing that, and that takes away from training to our doctrine statements, or upgrades, or whatever it is, or getting ready for deployments. And then and now there's one other tasking that has to be cut from the manning in the squadron, because we sat alert 24/7 at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina for Homeland Defense. And then we would get taskings. I remember spinning over to Camp David at night. Anytime George W. Bush decided he wanted to go to Camp David for the weekend, they'd have a 2-ship F-16s over the top of it, or F-15s, or whoever they would assign squadrons, and we get a tasker on a Wednesday that said, "Hey, starting Friday at 6 o'clock until Monday at 6 o'clock in the morning, you guys are going to be doing 4-hour caps over Camp David to protect the president."
So literally the whole time he was at Camp David, there was at least
Yeah.
two fighters circling overhead.
Yeah.
Oh,
Anywhere he went.
I didn't realize they had such a
Yeah.
protocol.
Even when he went to the ranch, and his ranch in Texas, they would deploy squadrons to Texas, and they would man 24/7 caps over the president. They would put a 30-mile TFR, so a ring around wherever he was, and nothing could fly into there. And if it did, we'd intercept it.
Is that protocol still ongoing, or was that just sort of coming off the heels of 9/11?
I would imagine that it's tailored back quite a bit now. You got to remember that this is like '02 to '04, so things are
Right.
still really fresh.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first started sitting alert at Shaw, we scrambled for everything. If there was a question at all, we scrambled. And when I was back at Shaw from 7 to 10, we hardly ever scrambled. So, the protocols get tighter. There's a little more distance from the event. So I think it just depends. But I doubt it's not like that. I don't think it's like that anymore.
Gotcha. Now, going back to what you kind of talked about is just, how serious you were taking your training and how you encourage like everyone else around you to take their training very, very seriously too. Jack Carr just posted on his Instagram, I think it was like last week. It was like a sign that I guess maybe his SEAL team had posted like outside like their dwellings in Afghanistan, maybe. I don't know the full context, but it simply said, the enemy thanks you for not giving 100% today.
Yeah.
And, and just thinking about that is, I would like to even try to say that that's a good mentality to, instill within ourselves even now, even though you and I are no longer on active service, because, the enemy doesn't necessarily have to be like a physical opponent, like in wartime, but the enemy could be things like self-doubt, laziness, lack of discipline, maybe competition in the workplace or in an industry that you're trying to break into and start a business in, so the enemy definitely thanks you for not giving 100%, because at any time you miss, an opportunity to learn or an opportunity to train or whatever the case may be, someone's going to pull ahead of you if you let off the gas pedal.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, like you have to take advantage of opportunities that are presented to you, and oftentimes taking advantages of those opportunities is going to make you get outside of your comfort zone, and it's not going to feel great, right? It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to involve some risk, right? It's going to, and whether it's shame or laziness or whatever that prevents you from doing that, at some point you've got to start every day is the potential to make a change. Every day is the potential to get a little better, right? And to maybe fix something. And that, like you were saying, that could be personally, that could be professionally, it could be whatever it needs to be for you, whatever that thing is. And yeah, I think it all comes down to mentality. Right. It really does. It's the only thing that's stopping you from doing anything is you.
Right. And go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And I was going to say, and of course, that was when you first set out to be a pilot, when you were still going from school. It's just, you had a lot of reservations wondering if they're going to accept you, if they're going to even take you at all. But if you didn't go to the recruiter that day, you already know what the result would have been. You wouldn't have gotten accepted.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, exactly.
But you actually went and you actually did get accepted. And, that's another thing like, too, I mean, Wayne Gretzky said, you're going to miss 100% of all the shots that you just don't take. And
that's right.
And of course, the idea of asking myself personally, what if, what if I went and like, let's say, talked to that girl at the coffee shop because I thought she was beautiful and I wanted to meet her? Like, what if I actually went and talked to her rather than just chickened out and left?
Yeah.
So
you never know, right?
I hate having to ask myself, what if?
Yeah,
for sure.
That was the same thing for me. I could live with no, but not what if. And the way that I like to frame it too is I love the Teddy Roosevelt "Man in the Arena" quote.
Oh yeah.
And when I talk to guys and when Roscoe and I are talking on our podcast, that's often what I'll refer to is like, you know what, boys, at some point you've just got to get in the arena. And yeah, it's going to suck. You're going to get dirty. You're going to get bloodied. You may not even win. You're probably going to fail. That's okay. At least you're striving. At least you're trying to do something greater. At least you're trying to improve. You're being valiant in your effort, and you won't die with those cold, timid souls that know neither victory or defeat, right? Like you've got to get in the arena. And if you're not going to, and getting in the arena requires you to get outside of your comfort zone. And so, and that can be really scary. I mean, I can't tell you, there were so many times in my Air Force career when I went through different training programs. Like I was fortunate enough to get selected to go to the weapons school, the United States Air Force Weapons School, which is in Las Vegas, Nevada at Nellis. And when I went through, there was only 16 F-16 guys that went through that course in a year. And it was very competitive, very hard to get into. And I'll never forget driving to Vegas from Phoenix to show up for the course, and I crested the hill in the south and saw the Vegas Valley, and I was just like, what the fuck did I just get myself into? Like, I'm going to be gone in 2 weeks. There's no way I'm getting through this program, right? There's absolutely no way. Like, I'm not good enough. Like, all that self-doubt, that fear, all of that stuff was just swirling in my mind. I did it. Sometimes it's just showing up, man. Sometimes it's just showing up and going through the reps too, right? And just doing the works. And not all of it was pretty. I failed rides. You're going to fail sometimes, but you just keep pressing forward.
Right. And I think a good way to get through that is just focus on one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you saw like all the training that you had to do as a pilot to ultimately fly operationally, it's just, I think that in and of itself could be a very defeating thing. It's like, oh man, I got to do this for like 2 years before I can even like, fly operationally. It's just, but I don't think you can't think like that. You just have to take it just one day at a time. It's like, okay,
Yep.
worry about flying operational when that day comes. Like now, you got to pass this test. So focus on the material for this.
What do I have to
first.
do to be ready for tomorrow's ride? Right. I'm focus on the process, not the outcome. Don't worry about the outcome. It'll take care of itself. Focus on what's in front of you and do that to the best of your ability. And if you do that, the outcome will take care of itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that was the mindset I had, a few years ago when I threw hiked across the entire state of Michigan. I mean, that was 1,200 miles.
That's crazy.
That I had to hike to get across that state. But again, it's just like if I just looked at the trail as a whole in that way, yes, it got to me mentally. I'm just like, you know what? Okay, my goal for today is 15 miles. Let me just focus on those 15 and then even whittle it back from there. Okay, focus on the next mile, the next step, even. And then it eventually all that just compounds. And the next thing you know, I hiked 1,200 miles.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just left foot, right foot. And just keep moving forward. That's all you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, okay, so you mentioned that you spent some time in Nellis, or because I actually spent a few months there with my squadron in the Marine Corps. We flew the Ospreys out in the desert. This was our final operation eval to see if we can get the Ospreys to go operational to go into the Middle East. And now I will say
what year was this?
This was 2005. 2005 that I was out there. And I got to tell you guys in the Air Force, you guys got the nicest shit. Okay. You guys got all the nicest shit. The hotel that we stayed in was really, really nice. And when I went to the mess hall to get breakfast one day, now in the Marine Corps mess halls, we had like the little like tray carts where you put your tray in the cart, and then eventually a member of staff will wheel it to the kitchen to get it washed and everything like that. So once I finished breakfast at the one in Nellis, I was walking around my tray and I couldn't find where to put it. And so I just asked a couple of airmen who were sitting there. I'm like, where am I supposed to take my tray? And they're like, oh, you just leave it there.
Just leave it on the table.
Someone will bust it for you. I'm like, y'all are some spoiled sons of bitches. You know that?
Yeah, well, the joke, right? When the like when the Marine Corps gets money, they buy bullets and I don't know, artillery or whatever the Marines buy. When the Army gets money, they buy tanks and APVs and all that stuff. When the Navy gets money, they buy boats, right? When the Air Force gets money, we build the gym, we build the golf course, we build the BX, and we build the housing area. And then we go back to Congress and go, hey, we need more money for a runway.
Okay. I would see it rolling out that way. And I would say your bases certainly reflect that because your bases are really, really nice for sure. All right. So like, now, of course, like going through like all these trainings and then, of course, like, again, coming off of 9/11 here, what did like kind of some of the early years of the war look like for you? Did you find yourself getting deployed quite a bit, or what did the op tempo kind of look like for you?
So when I got to Shaw Air Force Base, I was at Operation Northern Watch. So I don't know if you remember, but when we went into Iraq in 2003 timeline, we were still doing Operation Northern Watch and Southern Watch. So 36 and 32nd parallels. The Iraqis couldn't fly past them. So we were patrolling north of the 36, which is basically just south of Mosul, if you're familiar with Iraq.
Right.
And so I was over at ONW and we were doing, Northern Watch when things kind of started to build towards, the weapons of mass destruction and all that stuff and us going into Iraq. I don't know if you remember this, but there was a period in October or November ish, a few weeks before, probably a month, maybe 6 weeks before the war kicked off, where the Turkish parliament was like discussing whether or not they were going to allow us to fly, U.S. and allied forces to fly out of Turkey for the Iraqi invasion.
Mm.
And they deliberated it for like a week. And the plan was, if we were going to fly out of Turkey, we were going to stay in place, and the rest of our squadron, because our squadron was kind of cut in half because we only needed, I think, 10 jets when we were doing O&W. The squadron was going to come back out. We were going to plus up to what we would normally be, and we were going to fly out of Incirlik for the war. But they voted against it, and so everything went from the south. So one of the sister squadrons of ours from Shah ended up deploying for Operation Iraqi Freedom.
So remind me, where's Shaw situated?
South Carolina.
Okay.
So we flew back on, I think we came back in December, early December, and then the war kicked off that next year. This is end of 2002, like in February, I think it was. So I didn't deploy to Iraq until 2008. So, when I was at Shaw, by the time the 77th, our sister squadron came back, I was getting close to PCS. And so I left Shaw and went back to Luke to be an instructor at the basic course, got picked up for weapons school. So then I went to Nellis for 6 months for the weapons school course. And then I went back to Luke for 2 years. And there was a time in there that I was going to deploy from Luke in 2007 to be the wing weapons officer at Balad, which is about 40 miles north of Baghdad. But about 2 months before I was supposed to go, it got turned off because the weapons school had somebody at the weapons school that they were going to send. So it got switched, and I ended up staying, which actually ended up being a good thing because one of my really close friends who was also stationed at Luke with me at the time ended up getting killed over there. And so I was able to kind of be there for his wife and their kids as they went through that process. And then from Luke, I went back to Shaw again a second time, and then I ended up deploying from Shaw to Balad.
And so was like Balad like your final deployment before you transitioned to being an instructor, or how did it pan out that way?
No, so I had been an instructor since 2003.
Oh, okay.
So I'd already been an instructor for 5 years, had gone to the weapons school, did 2 years of instructing at Luke, and then came back to Shaw. And then we deployed in 2008 to Balad, which was cool, man. It was an old MiG-23 base. You'd walk around the buildings and there were still paintings of Saddam everywhere and stuff. And then we flew out of Balad in support of all the ground stuff that was still going on over there.
What was your family situation like at the time? Were you married at the time of your deployment? Did you have any children at that time?
Yeah, I had a wife and 3 kids. Yep. Ages basically like 10 to 5 at the time. So, yeah, and it was a little over 6-month deployment. So not quite Army length, but Air Force length.
Right. So what did the conversation look like with your wife and children? Because I'm sure, you at that age, there's probably a good sense of awareness that you're going to be gone for a good while, and then but still have fun explaining that to your children, right? That you're just going to be gone for the next 6 months or so.
Yeah.
So it's like, what did the conversation look like when you knew you were about to go?
Yeah, those are always, I think, difficult conversations, and especially in light of the fact that just a year prior, my friend had been killed, and there's, I think there was more fear, at least for my wife and stuff, about what I was going into that maybe hadn't been there before that, because we didn't lose a lot of guys over there necessarily in the F-16 community. We lost a couple, but not a lot. And so I think that there's but at the same time, my kids were used to me being gone because the operational tempo that we had was so high. I mean,
Sure.
we were always spinning up to go do something, whether it was a red flag exercise at Nellis for 2 or 3 weeks, or, going to green flag to spin up for deployment, or, going to a WESUP shoot out in Florida to shoot air to air missiles, or going to Combat Hammer to do air to ground employment out of Hill Air Force Base in Utah. I mean, we were always on the road. And then on top of that, you're sitting alert, or you're deploying to go fly over the president, or, you're getting tasked with all these random things. So I was gone a lot to begin with. So I don't know that my kids, I think there was probably a little bit of fear for my kids, especially my oldest son, who was 10 at the time, because I think he had more of an idea of like what was going on and what we were getting into.
Sure.
But my kids were also used to me being on the road. So I think it's just that's the lifestyle, man. I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. So with that in mind, I mean, of course, like even now, hopefully we don't have anything kick off here pretty soon where we're going to have like troops deployed like nonstop for the foreseeable future or anything like that. But I mean, would you have any advice for maybe any active service members right now who may be in the similar boat where they have like families and then there's a possibility they could be, deployed and away from them for like a good while?
Yeah, well, I would just say, the first thing that I would say is I wish I could have done a better job of being more present when I was home. So when you are home, try to be as present as possible. And that can be really tough depending on what's going on. There's a lot of distractions. A lot of times, if you're going, like when I was going through upgrades and stuff, I'd be distracted with thinking about, okay, my sortie for tomorrow. Here's the things I got to remember, my briefs, whatever the thing was, right? So just take advantage of the time you have, whether it's in garrison, in base, whatever, to just be present and get that time in with your significant other and your kids, and just cherish that time and build those relationships, And then if you've been in the military for any amount of time, man, when it's time to go, it's just time to go, right? We've got jobs to do, and do the best you can to help build a support structure around your family before you leave. I don't know what it's like in the other branches, but I know in the fighter community, the wives were very close knit, and we would show up to an assignment, and the commander's wife would give my wife a book of all the recommendations for plumbers, dentists, doctors, all the stuff. You're getting to a new city, new town, whatever. And then they did a good job of taking care of each other. So if something would break, because everything always breaks when you're gone, right? So if something would break, they did a really good job of but if you don't have that, or you're not in a situation like that, try to build community around your family so that they have that support while you're gone. Whether that's with other family members or just contacts in town, things like that. Relationships that you build just in the community. And then, once you're gone, man, you just gotta, it's a compartmentalization game, right? So, I know Roscoe probably talked to you about this, and I think the way he phrases it's pretty good, which is you kind of put your family in a box over here, and every once in a while you take it out and you go, yeah, that's great. And I wish I was home right now, but then you have to put it back away because you can't be distracted there. Especially with anything that anybody's doing, right? As soon as you're distracted, then the pendulum starts to swing the other way. So, in a fighter, you got to be focused and task on, because things shift so fast for us when we're in support of you guys on the ground. You'll be up there fat, dumb, and happy, doing road recce on a road. Then all of a sudden, you get a call and they're like, hey, dude, you're getting retasked. We need you to roll over to this keypad. The tanker's going to meet you on the way. There's a tick. And get the fuck over there, right? And so you're just like, shit, here we go, right? And so boom, and now it's just on, right? And now you're thinking about gas and getting on freak and what the fuck's going on, trying to build a picture for yourself and figure out who's the good guys, who's the bad guys, where's everybody situated, what's the best munition to use in this environment, especially if it's a tick or danger close. Do I need to strafe? Am I going to drop an LGB? Am I going to drop a JDAM? And then what are my avenues of attack going to be? Because what if I'm dropping a GBU-12, which is a laser guided bomb, and maybe the good guys are in the east and the bad guys are on the west? Well, I don't want to come from east-west, because if the bomb comes off the jet and chunks a fin and drops short, it's going to go right in the middle of blue land, right? So I've got to figure out my attack access and to make sure that if anything goes stupid with the bomb, it's not going to affect the good guys. It's going to hopefully affect the bad guys. There's just a lot going on, right? And you can't be distracted. Um, and then the other thing that I would say is on the return, man, um, just recognize that your wife has been a single man shop for however long you've been gone, and you're going to be fucking it all up when you first get back. So have some patience, right? Like listen to her, let her ease you back into the process because she's not used to having you around, and she's used to doing things her way and the way that she does it and the time she does it. And there can be some friction that happens there because of that, right? Because you want to just jump in and help and help and help, but then you don't have maybe full awareness for the kids' schedules, and so and so has piano lessons on Tuesdays and Thursdays and soccer practice on Wednesdays and Fridays, and here's the times, and then you end up just fucking it up. So yeah, just give it time, be patient. When you come back, stay in contact. If you can figure out things, if you can figure out ways to build rituals of connection and reconnection with your wife or your significant other when you come back, I think those are very valuable.
Now, going along with this box analogy that you brought up here, I mean, it's just you mentioned when you're deployed, your home life goes into that box. You may take a peek inside of it every now and then just to kind of think, and and I would also maybe dare say give you some hope as well,
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
give you something to fight for. That sounds cliche, but it is. I mean, ultimately, I think for us service members, we go into our service because we want to we like send us, right? Like we want to be the ones to do the fighting. It's like I wouldn't want like the kids in my life or the women in my life to have to put on body armor and pick up a rifle and have to fight. I should be
Yeah,
the one to
absolutely.
do that, right? But
Yep.
then of course you swap out the box, or you swap things in and out of the box when you return home. When you get home, the flying, the fighting, the deploying, the sleepless nights, all that shit just gets shoved in the box, and you're focused on your family. And yeah, you may take a peek in there from like time to time, thinking about what you just been through, or maybe what might be on the horizon with that, but it's still in the box because now it's like you're not the fighter pilot inside your household. You're now dad. You're now
Yeah.
husband. Things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a weird transition too, especially if you've been, somebody on the ground who's been in heavy fighting, and then all of a sudden you come home and, it's like, I don't know, it's Chick-fil-A in the movies, and everything's safe. And, it's such a different environment than what we get used to, right? It's weird what you get used to when you're deployed in a combat environment. Um, and so just give yourself time to decompress too, right? And if you need it, seek help if you need it, right? Like get professional help to help you to build some skills and tools around managing some of those things, or, ways that are good for you, healthy ways to decompress, instead of like turning to the bottle like so many guys do and just trying to self-soothe and numb versus dealing with whatever, potential trauma that you may have to deal with from the time that you spent overseas. So
Yeah, I really do like how that message is coming forth,
I
for
do
our
too.
service members to really focus on their mental health, because
Yeah.
I feel like maybe in the early days of the post 9/11, generation, I think a lot of it was just like, oh man, just quit being a pussy, quit
Yeah.
being a pussy, man up, toughen up, and everything like that, deal with it. But I think that narrative has kind of shifted quite a bit, because I mean, I think that kind of just like left a lot of our service members to try to combat it alone, and I think it's just like, and that's so counterintuitive to what being in the service actually is. And you and I talked about this sooner, is that you are part of a team, and
Yes.
and that doesn't stop just because your active service ends. You're still part of a team,
Yeah, well, what's hard about that is it forces people to isolate, right? So if it's like, oh, just
right?
deal with it yourself, well, then what do? You isolate. Well, isolating isn't probably the best thing you need to do if you're dealing with some real trauma and shit like that. Like, and that's what therapists are for. They're there to help you unpack that stuff and to help you build skills to deal with it, right? And to reframe some of those things. So I mean, I'm married to a therapist, man. I've been to therapy. There's no harm, no foul in it. It's a great thing. I've learned a ton of resiliency skills and things like that, through therapists. And, they can just help you unpack a lot of that stuff that somebody who's not skilled or trained in how to do that can do for you. So, and the problem with isolation too is then you get out and somebody hands you a flag and it's over. And if your identity is wrapped up in, you were Sergeant so and so, or you were, CAS Cooper, the fighter pilot or whatever, and all of a sudden that's over, dude, don't forget that you're actually Jason Cooper. You're not just a fighter pilot. Like, I think oftentimes as men, it's really easy for us to wrap our identity up in what we do when
Right.
it's really just a part of who we are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because it makes it that much more difficult to move on to the next thing or the
That's
next
right.
mission. And of course, like that's ultimately what it boils down to. It's just like, yeah, you leave the service. It's just you still got a long life ahead of you still. And you have to find your next mission, whatever
Yeah.
that would be. And I know for like a lot of guys who obviously like we talked about earlier about a lot of the special operations guys, a lot of them go into contracting because that obviously suits them pretty well. They kind of continue what they're good at too, and everything like that. So, kind of going along with that, and I asked Roscoe the same question, so I got to ask you too. Is just being up in a fighter jet, have like being in an aircraft that can go supersonic and everything like that. It has to be just a hell of a rush. And I can't think of anything that someone can do in the civilian sector to replicate the rush that you would get with taking a jet that fast. So, what was that transition like? Getting out of the cockpit for the final time, and because I just can't think of anything. Thinking
Yeah.
anything that you can get a civilian that can
There,
replicate
there
that.
is, there's nothing that comes close to it that you could do on the civilian side. Because tactical aviation is so much different than commercial aviation in the sense that, well, one, in commercial aviation, the jet's flying itself most of the time. You're really just monitoring systems, honestly, and what it's doing. We're like tactical aviation, you're always flying the airplane. But tactical aviation is different too because the aircraft is just an extension of you and your game plan. Like, you're not even thinking about flying the airplane in the moments that you're flying the airplane. You're thinking about the game plan you're executing and what you need to do to kill the leading edge or to get bombs on time on target or, to help the guys out that are calling for help on the ground. All of your mental effort is going into that. The flying part is so secondary. And that's all through the training you do because it's just that repetition over and over and over again, right? And so it's very different and unique in that sense. Much more mentally challenging than anything on the commercial side or the civilian side. Yeah, there's really no. I can't think of anything either, honestly. Like, it's hard to explain like what it's like to pull G's at a 8-9 G's and to sustain it over time. And the tactical fighter community too is you live in 3 dimensions. There's really no up, down, left, right. It's just, where do I need to fucking put the nose to kill whatever I'm supposed to kill, right? And how do I get there the fastest? So it's just a very different mindset and arena in that sense.
Gotcha. All right. Well, Kaz, as we kind of start winding down our conversation here, I just have a few final standard questions that I like to ask all my guests towards the end of the show. And one of the things I like to ask my guests to do is to issue a challenge to our listeners and our viewers because, we got to hear some great stories from you. We got to get some good information and insights from you. But as I always say, is that those things can only take our listeners and our viewers so far. They themselves have to follow up with action once they're done listening to us talk today. So, with that, what challenge would you issue to our listeners and viewers for them to go out there and live a more adventurous life?
I would say that, especially for anybody that may be struggling out there, that you are more capable than you think you are. And until you find ways to challenge yourself in different ways and to find ways to add value, whether that's at work, whether that's to your family, whether that's to your community, whatever you want to put that into, that would be my challenge is, find ways to grow personally, professionally, challenge yourself and add value. Find a way to add value.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. All right. So, what I have next for you is my final three. And these are three I like to think that they're fun questions that all my guests get asked at the end of the show. And like I said, you're going to get asked these just as well. And the first of these three questions is, what is your favorite place that you've been to so far?
Like in the world,
Hmm.
or
In the whole wide world.
oh, my favorite place in the whole wide world is Disneyland.
That's a first to come up on the podcast. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
I love it. I'm a Disney adult. I'll admit it.
Now, okay, so Disneyland, that's the one in California,
Yeah,
right? And Disney World is Florida.
I'll take either. Yeah.
Okay. All right. It's been so long since I've been there. They with all the high tech gadgetry that's out there too, they just must have really elevated like all their experiences in those
Well,
parks.
it's cool. And to be completely transparent and vulnerable with you right now, the reason that I love Disneyland, I realized this a few years ago, is because I had a relatively traumatic childhood after about the age of 12.
Mm,
And I was parentized and I had to grow up really fast. And what I've realized is when I go back there, that sense of wonder that I lost as a child, I get back for, just a little bit of fleeting time.
gotcha.
And I think that's why I enjoy it so much.
All right. But like I said, that is a first to come up as an answer for
Yeah.
this podcast. So
And yes,
far,
I'm a fighter pilot.
yeah. So far we are 1 for 1 for original answers to these questions, but I got a
Right
couple
on.
more for you. And the next question is, what is one thing on your bucket list that you have yet to do?
Um, I am running a half marathon in December in Tucson,
Hmm.
and I'm trying to run it in under 2 minutes or 2 hours.
I was gonna say 2 minutes.
Yeah,
Damn.
it's not 2 minutes, 2 hours. So yeah, that's on my bucket list right now. That's the thing that I'm working towards right now.
And didn't you just get done with the Spartan?
Yeah, we just did a 10K Spartan race this last weekend. So
Right on. So yeah, I'm kind of training for an endurance event myself. I just signed up for a High Rocks. Have you seen any High Rocks stuff
no,
before? So High Rocks is they call it hybrid racing. So it's like running with some exercises thrown in, and it originated in the UK. So pretty much
okay,
all of the distances and weights are all in metric. So I had to do a little bit of uh, conversions there. So you run a kilometer and then you do an exercise, you run another kilometer, you do another
oh
exercise,
wow,
and you do that for a total of 8 rounds. And so when it's all said and done, you run 8K, which is about 5 miles, and then the exercises are functional fitness exercises like that. You got like the rowing machine, you got the wall balls where you squat with the medicine ball, then you throw it up on the wall. You got to
that's
push
cool.
you got to push a sled, you got to pull the sled, you got to farmers carry a couple of heavy kettlebells.
And
So
what's it called?
high rocks.
High Rocks. I'm gonna have to look that up. That sounds fun.
Yeah, it's a HYROX, and
Okay,
you can actually they actually have doubles competition too, where you can actually like team up with people, and it could be like a man teaming up with a man, women teaming up with women, or even like men and women will team up to do a high rocks competition together. You kind of just sort of like swap out like certain parts of exercises, or one person does like an exercise entirely, and the other person does the other exercise entirely.
that's
And
cool.
it looks like a lot of fun. And I signed up for one here in March in Houston,
Nice.
so I'm training for that at the moment.
Yeah, and just going back to what we were talking about earlier too, for any of your listeners out there, like just I'm 51 years old, man. I've never been a runner necessarily. I'm not even really built for running necessarily, but like set goals for yourself that force you to challenge yourself, right? Like that's a
Hmm.
way for me to stay engaged in fitness for myself, is to find ways to challenge myself. And the half marathon was one of them. It was okay, well, I've never done it before, and I'm in pretty good shape. So I'm like, well, let's train for it. Let's see if I can build the endurance to do it or not. Right. And give myself a time goal and give me something to shoot for. And it helps because it's over the last couple months, it's really kept me engaged and disciplined and focused on my fitness and my workout routine. So there's an example.
Yeah, and I also, since we also kind of talked about the importance of community too, especially amongst like veterans, is make a friendly competition out of it, like too, if you can, because I I have a buddy of mine who is actually he lives in Florida, but he's coming out to Houston for High Rocks. But he does he's doing the men's pro, which is like heavier weights on a lot of the exercises. Like, and it's elevated quite a bit because he's at that level now.
Yeah.
And I kind of called him out because he said, "Let me know if you want me to review your training plan." I'm like, well, I'm going to keep my training plan to myself because I intend to beat you
Yeah.
when we both go to High Rocks. But then, of course, like he just came on the podcast and he was like sending me some photographs of for me to use for his episode in the show notes, and he's standing on like podiums at some of these hybrid races. So he's like at a
He's
level
like
where
at a
he's
super competitive level.
yeah, so he's beating other competitors
Wow.
like in this game. So I'm like, I might have just called out the wrong guy, but
Yeah. But that's good, man. It's all fun,
exactly.
right?
It's all fine. It's like that gives me something to really strive for now.
The whole reason we ran the Spartan race, I'd never done a Spartan race before, but Roscoe and I signed up for that because we had a friend who, had wanted to start getting a little more serious about his fitness, needed to lose some weight. And so that was the thing that we put on the calendar to motivate him because we ran it with him. And dude, he did awesome. Like in about a 6-month time period, he lost like 25 pounds. He got in way better shape and he crushed it, man. It was a lot of fun. So
And
yeah,
that's a
circle
great
around
way.
people and help them.
Yeah, and that's a great way to do it is to put something on the calendar. And when you do, don't negotiate with your
Nope.
calendar. If you put
Have
it on there,
accountability.
yeah, if you put it on there, you have to do it.
Yep.
That's it. So, but hopefully you go in there prepared and you've done all the work necessary to go out there and do it. But either way, don't negotiate, do it.
Yeah.
So, all right. So what I have next
Sorry,
for
my
you.
bucket list was lame because I got to do everything I wanted to by flying fighter, so I don't really have a bucket list. Sorry.
Well, this is the next thing. I mean, obviously, again, something to always strive for and to continue to get better for, like we talked about. So, all good, brother. And the last question that I have for you, and this is a two-parter: what is your favorite animal, and have you seen this animal in the wild?
Yeah, my favorite animal probably honestly is a bald eagle. I just think they're beautiful and majestic, and I saw them in Washington a lot growing up. Um, and yes, I have seen them in the wild.
Yeah,
They're amazing birds, man. Have you ever seen one of them dive into the ocean?
I haven't seen one dive in the ocean. I mean, I've seen them in the wild myself, but no, I haven't seen one dive into water
Yeah,
yet.
their nests are huge too. But if you got to the Washington coast, you'll see them, and man, it's impressive. It's impressive to watch them. I mean, they don't dive into the water very deep very often. They usually, see things that's kind of towards the surface level and just kind of get their claws down. But every once in a while, they'll just roll the wings back and dive in, and then you'll see them pop up like 5 seconds later because they're going so fast. And they've got a salmon in their claws, or I think they're just awesome.
Have you ever heard about what happens to a bald eagle once they turn about 40 years old?
No.
All right, so this is probably an interesting tale for anyone who is like me, an aging athlete. Like, I turned 39 on Sunday actually, and when a bald eagle turns around 40 years old, what happens to its body is a lot of its body kind of is rendered useless. Like its beak is like becomes very, very dull, not very sharp. Same thing with its talons. Like its talons won't be able to grip like things properly, and its feathers are just like so heavy that it's unable to fly. So it's pretty much unable to hunt effectively.
Yeah.
So at that point, a bald eagle has a choice. It could either pretty much resign itself to its fate and and end up just like dying because he can't fly, he can't hunt, or he can undergo a very, very painful metamorphosis, and that is that he rips out all of his old feathers. He crushes his dulled out beak and rips out his dulled out talons, and he literally regrows all of that from scratch, pretty much.
No way. I did not know that.
The whole process is extremely painful, and it takes like a long time for the bird to recover. But if it undergoes that successfully, it can literally pretty much like live like an entirely second life. Like it could
Wow.
potentially live for another 40 years.
That's amazing.
But so because like a friend of mine shared that with me, and the analogy is that like as an aging athlete, it's just like we always kind of have that choice. Like some people want to take their foot off the gas pedal and just sort of kind of just really sort of like taper off, but I think the argument there is, you keep getting after it in whatever which way you
Hmm.
can. I mean,
Yeah.
you mentioned you're in your early 50s, but you're preparing to run a half marathon. And there was a reel that I saw on Instagram from High Rocks. It was two women doing doubles together. One of them was 66 years old, and the other one was 72. And
Yeah.
they both finished High Rocks together. And like I said, like these women ran a total of 5 miles, and they did a bunch of other
Yeah.
exercises along the way, which is extremely impressive. But
There were there was a 72-year-old woman with walking, like, the hiking sticks, that was at the Spartan 10K. And now she didn't do all the obstacles, obviously, because she's not gonna, you know, rope climb and, do rope climbs 20, 30 feet or anything like that. She mostly just walked the course. But still, dude, like 72 years old, doing 6.2 miles up and down uneven terrain, it was cool. It was very motivating,
yeah, so just
especially
keep
when she passed me. No.
Yeah, but that's it. Just keep getting after it. And, so I like that you mentioned ball eagles because you made me think of that. And
Yeah, that's a great story, man. I had no idea.
yeah, it's a good lesson for sure. And now I'm trying to think. So I think the half marathon might have been a first for my second question. I'm trying to remember if someone else has mentioned. No, I think someone else has already mentioned eagles. So I think we're 2 for 3 for original
Okay.
answers to these
Right on.
questions. But good
All right.
stuff. Very
I'll
good
take it.
stuff. All right. So now, before we call it a day here, though, Kaz, I want to ask you to share like where our listeners and viewers can connect with you. You're a co-host for the B1 Change One podcast, and I've had the privilege to be a guest on your podcast. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about it, and where can we go to connect with you?
Yeah. So, well, real quick before I go into that, I just want to thank you, Josh, for what you're doing, dude, because I think there's a lot of power in story. And I think that there's a lot of power, especially for veterans, to be able to have outlets to come on to a podcast or a show, and to talk with somebody who has kind of chewed the same dirt that they have, and share what their experiences have been. I think that's a gift. And so I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing, brother, because I think it's very powerful and I think it's very needed.
Absolutely.
But as far as our stuff, Roscoe and I are co-hosts of the B1 Change One podcast. We focus a lot on, defining values, how to define your personal values, how to practice integrity, how to build skills for resiliency and adversity. We've talked about shame and shame resiliency on the podcast, empathy and validation. We did a whole 2-part on emotional intelligence. And so all we're trying to do is we're trying to help men build skills to be more well-rounded, more mentally healthy, more capable, and to just be able to show up better in their own lives and to show up in the way and in the manner for the people that they love or at work or whatever in the way that they want to. And because everything's a skill, man, we just got to build it, right? And a lot of us don't get taught this stuff when we're younger. A lot of us grew up in homes where it's, figure it out, do it yourself, get tougher, don't show emotion, all those things. And all of that's bullshit, dude. You got to learn. You got to learn skills. And so we're just trying to help teach those skills from lessons that we've learned through our time in the military and afterward. So, and you guys can find us at b1change1.com, or if you just go to B1 Change One. We're on all the major platforms for podcasts. You can email me from the website. We also have a YouTube channel, or you can find me on any of the socials, Jason Cooper. So,
All right, and I'll get everything linked down in the show notes below, or if we have viewers that are watching us talk on YouTube, it'll be down in the description below just as well too. So nice and easy for them to go and find everything. All right. Well, Kaz, I want to thank you very much for taking the time for joining me today. I mean, I'm sure, I hope I'm not keeping you up.
nope, not at
I'm
all.
sure you got to rest at some point to get ready to fly tomorrow. But yeah, I just really appreciate you and Roscoe and just how you both are showing up in the world. So thank you very much for being here tonight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, brother. It was a pleasure.
All right. Right on.